see how I did the clap and they begin to make noise and come to the gate?
Mm-hmm.
It's all about perspectives in life, right? So one thing that I've learned is that we have a tendency to say things like, I would never do this or I would never do that. But until you put yourself in those shoes, and this is common knowledge, right? You know, you've heard people say things like this. It's like until you put yourself in their shoes, you don't really know what you would actually do. It's the reason why our people, our ancestors, had a tendency to go after Baal. See, we're Hebrews. We should be doing what Hebrews do. And so much of our thought processes is still so westernized. It really is. And I can't stress that enough. One of the reasons why our ancestors would have this tendency to worship Baal is because if you do your research on Baal, Baal is the storm god. So when you're dealing with a people who were agrarian, who made their living and lived off of the land, planting and reaping, sowing and reaping, a people who made a living off of this depended on what? Rain. So it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it right at all. But when you understand that Baal, their neighbor's god, was just known as the so-called storm god, understand that when you're going through dry patches or you live in a dry area, such as Israel, it makes perfect sense to understand why they had this tendency to consistently go after Baal. Let me go ahead and let these other go. So he had this tendency to constantly go after Baal because he was a storm god. So if you're a people who are truly hoping and praying for a plentiful harvest, you're probably going to want some rain. And if that's what was ingrained in their mind, and that they believed, because their neighbors believed, that the rain came from this god, then that is the reason why they responded like this. So it doesn't make it right, but it helps you understand. I remember the first time that I began to plant stuff. It was like 7 years ago. And I remember, man, I hated the rain. I absolutely hated the rain. Terrible traffic conditions, gloomy weather, just makes you sleepy, makes you lazy, not want to do anything, not want to go outside or nothing like that, right? It's very, very, very dreary. Something that, you know, you don't really want to see, especially a couple of days in a row. But then I began to plant. Now I wanted to try to get, just get my hands dirty, so to speak, with testing the waters on planting food for the first time. This is before I ever met an actual farmer. This is before I was doing what I'm doing now, homesteading and stuff like that. But I remember when I first started planting them, I had the time to water. So I planted, I watered, and I began to see them sprout up, and everything was cool. But then I got a little busy. And then after I got busy, I noticed that we had a dry spell, and I didn't have the time to go home and water the plants. Or when I got home, everything was dark. So if I watered them, they just wasn't getting the proper care, right? I wasn't able to tend to it the way I needed to. And then sometimes I just forgot because I was new to it. And then I noticed after a while, when I start seeing these things dying, man, I'm like, yo, I wish it would rain. we need more rain. And then I found myself hoping and yearning for the very thing that I once despised, simply because my circumstances changed. My circumstances changed. Then I start looking and hoping and desiring for the thing that I hated, which was never a bad thing at all, but my perspective was off. Not even thinking that farmers, they need this. Other people who don't have the access to irrigation systems need this. The land needs this. I wasn't thinking about that. I was in my comfort zone and in my environment where those things didn't matter, so I hated it. But once I put myself in a different situation, then it helped me to see, like, yo, I never desired the rain until I began to plant, until I wanted to grow my own food. Perspectives. It's the reason why the text says that the Mashiach was tempted just like we were. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. The Mashiach was tempted in ways just like we were, because that gives us a high priest who understands. When you're able to understand something, it makes you more humble. It makes you more compassionate. It makes you more forgiving. So if I know that I struggled with something, right? If I struggled with something and my brother has struggled with something, but I've already gone through it, I can relate to him. So I understand him more and I understand his struggle. So I'm much more compassionate towards him. I'm more forgiving if I'm asking him to do something or I'm advising him to do something and he's falling because he's struggling with this. Well, I've struggled with it and I maybe know how hard that was to overcome. It makes you more compassionate. Let me go. I gotta really Oh, before I do that, the same spot here, once again, all about perspectives. So I remember maybe like last week, I came here and it was raining a lot. And I lifted up the soil because there's areas in this soil that's very, very dry, very, very dry. Don't have the microorganisms that I would desire to have. But this area over here, ironically where the goats are, it's different. And it was raining and I pulled up some of the grass. And I don't remember why I pulled up some of the grass, but I pulled up the grass and I seen a bunch of worms. A bunch of worms. Now they're not here right now because it hasn't rained in a couple of days. But it was so many worms in this soil. And I was like a little kid. I was so excited for worms. And so I told my children to get a wheelbarrow. We came over here and we started pulling up grass, and we went over there and I started taking the worms out and we started putting it in the soil that I was going to use for planting some trees and stuff down here. And it was just interesting, man, because I remember worms was another thing that I hated until I started learning about this stuff and I started realizing that, hey, these things are beneficial to the soil. And I just pulled it up and I was excited. So once again, it's all about perspective. You don't know what you would actually do in certain situations unless you have truly prepared for it or you actually have experienced it. We need to be a little more forgiving. We need to be a little more forgiving of people and things, because we don't know all of their circumstances or the things that they had to go through, the things that they were experienced that caused them to do certain things that they've done. Come on. See, she's actually pregnant, so she can't really tell right now from the angle, but she's extra big. So I believe that she's carrying about 2 kids. She should be dropping those kids off. Any day now. People coming to this walk after a couple months, they think that they can teach. But there's so much that you need to experience before you can really be well-rounded. Like a lot of people haven't studied the language to realize that the culture is encapsulated in the language. A lot of people have not grown food to truly understand the principles of reaping and sowing. A lot of people have not had cattle, animals, right? To understand what it looks like. To actually chew the cud. What that actually looks like, right? Or what it feels like to actually see the difference between sheep and goats. A lot of people haven't been over to Israel, to the land. You hear how the goat is making those noises, and now they hear it? They are herd animals, so they want to stay together. A lot of people haven't been to Israel to even see what the land looks like and possibly could have looked like during that time. Or Egypt, for that matter. You know how often that's mentioned in the scriptures? We've become a people built and assembled through theory and theology, experienced so separately.